There's a number. Most people don't know theirs, and not knowing it is costing them decades. I want to be precise about what I mean by that, because I'm not talking about your net worth. I'm not talking about your salary, your savings rate, your credit score, or any of the numbers that financial culture has trained you to obsess over. I'm talking about a smaller number, a quieter number, a number that, for most people, feels almost embarrassingly modest when they first calculate it, and yet is the single most clarifying piece of financial information you could ever have about your own life. It's the number that determines when the equation flips, when your money generates more per month than your essential expenses cost. When the second clock, the one you've been building quietly, one small decision at a time, finally starts to run fast enough that it covers the cost of your life without you having to show up and earn that coverage every single day. That number, for the average person living a modest but comfortable life, is closer than almost anyone believes. I've watched people discover it and go quiet for a moment. Not from discouragement, not from despair at how far they still have to go, but from something stranger and more useful than that, from the sudden, disorienting realization that the finish line was never as far away as the race felt. That the distance they'd been told to expect between where they are and where they want to be had been exaggerated somewhere along the way, maybe by content designed to keep them consuming, maybe by a financial industry that profits from complexity, maybe just by the accumulating weight of years of not quite knowing what they were building toward. Today, we're going to find your number. We're going to understand exactly what it means and how it works, and why it's the anchor that makes everything else in the passive income conversation actually make sense. And then we're going to talk about what it genuinely, practically, honestly takes to reach it. Not the version you've been sold, the real version. The one that is available to an actual person with an actual income and an actual life that doesn't include a large audience or a viral product or a real estate empire. But before I give you the framework and the numbers and the practical steps, I want to give you something that I think matters more than any of that. I want to give you two pictures, two ways of seeing the same life from different vantage points, because I've found over many years that the deepest truths land differently when they wear a specific shape, when they're not just an idea, but something you can see and feel and recognize. The first picture is this. I want you to imagine two clocks hanging on the same wall, side by side, same size, same face. From the outside, they look identical. They both keep time. They both show you the same hours, but they run on completely different principles. The first clock runs on a battery that you replace every single day. Every morning, without exception, without a day off, without a sick day or a vacation or a moment where you just don't feel like it, you get up and you insert a new battery and the clock runs for that day. If the day is good and you have energy and everything goes smoothly, you put in the battery and the clock ticks and everything is fine. But if you're exhausted, if you're sick, if you're depleted, if life has been particularly heavy lately and you wake up one morning and you just genuinely cannot, the clock stops, no battery, no time, no presence, no income. The clock doesn't know you're tired. The clock doesn't care that you've been doing this for 20 years and that you deserve a break and that by any reasonable measure you've earned the right to rest. Without the battery, it stops. This is active income. Honest, real, deeply valuable. I'm not dismissing it, but fundamentally, structurally dependent on your continuous presence and effort. The moment you stop, it stops. The second clock runs on a small generator that's built into the wall, something you constructed over time, piece by piece, using a portion of each day's battery to power something that would eventually not need you at the switch. The generator draws from a source that doesn't require your daily attention. You still maintain it. You check on it periodically. You understand how it works well enough to recognize when something needs adjusting and to make that adjustment with confidence. But you do not have to be there every single day for the hands to keep moving. The clock runs. The time passes. The income arrives. Whether you're sleeping or traveling or sick or simply choosing to spend a Tuesday afternoon doing something that has nothing to do with generating money. That is the structural reality of passive income. Not magic, not effortless, not entirely maintenance-free, because nothing real is ever entirely maintenance-free, but fundamentally, irreversibly different in its relationship to your time. And the only question, really, once you understand this picture clearly, is how do you go from the first clock to the second? How do you use the time you're trading for batteries today to build the generator that eventually makes the daily battery irrelevant? That is what this entire conversation is about. And the answer, I want to tell you right now before we go any further, is simpler than the industry that profits from this topic wants you to believe. Now let me give you the second picture. This one asks more of you. It asks you to travel forward in time and meet a version of yourself that made one good decision at a starting point that looked unremarkable. There is a particular kind of frustration that comes from being told that something small will eventually become something large, because the gap between the planting and the forest is not a comfortable place to stand. It tests your patience. It tests your belief. It tests your ability to value something that doesn't yet look like anything. And most people, standing at that gap, decide that the small thing isn't worth tending, that the yield isn't significant enough, that there must be a faster, more dramatic path that they simply haven't found yet. So they go looking for the faster path, and they spend years looking, and the acorn sits unplanted, and time, the only truly irreplaceable resource in this equation, passes. But I want you to imagine a version of yourself 10 years from now who planted the acorn, who sat with the frustration of the gap and planted it anyway, who made the small, consistent, undramatic decision to redirect a portion of every dollar into something that would generate return without their daily presence. Not 100 acorns, not a dramatic gesture. One, chosen carefully, positioned correctly, tended with modest but reliable attention over a decade. That future version of you is not rich in a way that looks impressive on the outside. They haven't disrupted an industry or built a massive audience or made a single brilliant investment that changed everything. What they are is something quieter and more permanent, and I would argue more genuinely valuable than dramatic wealth. They are financially unhurried. Their essential expenses, the floor of their life, the cost of existing with dignity and stability are covered by income that doesn't require their daily participation. The generator is running. The second clock is keeping time. And here is the part I want you to really feel, because I think this is the part that most passive income content never quite reaches. That future self does not experience this as a financial victory. They experience it as a texture change in their daily life. The decisions they make look different because the desperation is gone. They take the project they care about instead of the one that pays 20% more. They leave the job that has been slowly diminishing them without the paralyzing financial panic that keeps most people in situations they've outgrown. They negotiate differently, they rest differently, they spend time with their children or their parents or their own thinking without the low-grade anxiety that financial precarity produces in the background of almost every waking moment. They sleep differently. Not because everything is perfect, it never is. And the absence of financial pressure doesn't remove the other pressures that a full human life contains, but because the fundamental relationship between their time and their survival has permanently, quietly, irreversibly changed. The floor is there, they built it, and standing on something solid changes how you reach for everything above it. That acorn was small. The starting point was unremarkable. The early years were unglamorous, but it was real, and it was planted. And time, the same time that passes, whether you plant the acorn or not, did what time does when you give it a real structure to work with. It compounded. So now let's talk about what actually sits inside that picture. Let's take it apart and find the principles, because I want you to have more than an inspiring image. I want you to have something you can carry into your actual decisions. The first thing I need you to understand is that passive income is not one thing. It is a spectrum. And the single most common reason that motivated, intelligent people fail to build it is that they are directed by content, by advertising, by the structure of what gets attention online toward the wrong end of that spectrum before they've built the foundation that would make the more complex approaches work. Let me describe both ends so you can see where you actually are and where you actually need to start. At the truly passive end of the spectrum, you have things like dividend-paying stocks and index funds with distribution reinvestment, bonds and bond funds, real estate investment trusts that you don't directly manage, high-yield savings instruments in favorable rate environments, and royalties from creative work you've already made. These instruments share a common characteristic. They require capital or creative effort up front, and then they generate return with minimal ongoing attention. You don't need to show up every day. You don't need to manage a customer relationship or create new content or respond to tenant calls at 11 o'clock at night. You position the capital, you understand what you own well enough to monitor it intelligently, and you let the structure work across time. These are boring, they are slow, the early returns feel insultingly small, and they are, by any honest assessment, the most reliable path to genuine passive income available to a regular person with regular resources. At the other end of the spectrum, you have things like rental properties that require active management, online businesses that require constant content creation, digital products that need ongoing marketing and customer support, affiliate businesses that need traffic and optimization and technical maintenance. These are legitimate income streams. Some of them can eventually become genuinely passive once they reach a certain scale and have the right infrastructure. But they are not passive at the beginning. At the beginning, they are intensely active. They require skills and systems and often significant capital of a different kind: time capital, learning capital, the capital of failure and iteration, and the willingness to work very hard at something that might not work for a long time before it does. There's nothing wrong with building these things, but building them in the hope that they'll be passive soon is a misunderstanding that costs people years. The industry almost exclusively sells the second category to people who actually need the first. Not because the second is always wrong for everyone, but because the second has more steps, more courses to take, more tools to buy, more coaching to hire, more expensive mistakes whose solutions can be packaged and sold. The first category, the boring, slow, compounding, genuinely passive approach, doesn't have much to sell you once you understand it. And that absence of sales opportunity is, I believe, a significant reason why it gets so much less attention than it deserves. The paradox I want you to hold on to here is this: the most genuinely passive income streams are also the least exciting to talk about. Boring and reliable rarely goes viral. Boring and reliable rarely generates a compelling thumbnail or an urgent headline or a story that spreads. But boring and reliable is exactly what financial freedom is actually made of, in case after case after case of people who built it for real. The exciting versions are real, but they're the exception. The boring version is the rule. And if you're serious about this, if you genuinely want the second clock to run, starting with the boring version is not settling for less. It is choosing correctly. Now let's talk about the number. Because I mentioned it at the beginning and I want to go much deeper with it now, because I think it is genuinely the most important and most underused concept in the entire passive income conversation. Your number is the monthly passive income figure at which your essential life expenses are covered. Let me be specific about what I mean by essential. I don't mean your ideal lifestyle. I don't mean the version with the nice vacations and the upgraded apartment and the restaurant meals and the regular new clothes. I mean your floor. The cost of existing with dignity and stability in your actual life right now. Your housing, rent, or mortgage payment. Your utilities. Your food at a reasonable and nourishing level. Your basic transportation. Your healthcare costs. The things that, if they stopped being covered, would represent a genuine crisis rather than an inconvenience. Add those numbers up. For most people in most modest circumstances, and I'm being genuinely careful here, not optimistic, that number is somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000 per month. For some people in high cost of living cities, it might be higher. For others, in lower cost areas or with paid off housing, it might be lower. But the range I'm describing encompasses the reality of a very large portion of the people likely to be watching this. And what that range translates to at A conservative and sustainable yield of 4 to 5% annually from a diversified portfolio of dividend-paying assets is a required capital base of somewhere between $300,000 and $700,000. Now, I know that sounds large. I know that for many people, those numbers feel like they belong in someone else's life. And I understand that feeling completely. But I want to walk you through what those numbers actually look like over time, because I think the timeline is different from what the size of the target suggests. If you are 30 years old and you redirect $400 per month into a diversified dividend-paying portfolio that generates an average annual return of 7%, which is conservative by historical standards, for a broad equity portfolio, you will reach $300,000 in approximately 23 years. That means financial freedom of the foundational kind by your early 50s. Now increase that monthly contribution as your income grows, even modestly, even just keeping pace with inflation and the timeline compresses. Start the habit at 25 instead of 30, and you're potentially there by your mid-40s. These are not exciting numbers. Nobody is going to put them on a YouTube thumbnail next to a Lamborghini, but they are real numbers. They are achievable numbers. They are the numbers that describe a path to genuine freedom that is actually available to an actual person with an actual life, not the exceptional case that content uses to sell the average person a fantasy they'll never reach. And here is what matters even more than the math. The number gives you something to navigate toward. Before you know your number, passive income is a vague aspiration, a direction without a destination, a desire that the industry can sell infinite products toward because you have no way of measuring how close or how far you actually are. The moment you know your number, the moment you write it down and make it real and specific, and yours, the aspiration becomes a target. And a target is something you can aim at, something you can make decisions in relationship to, something that transforms every financial choice from a freestanding event into a data point on a journey that has a known destination. Most people feel overwhelmed by passive income because they're trying to solve a problem they haven't defined. The number defines the problem. And a defined problem, even a large one, even one that will take years to solve, is fundamentally less overwhelming than an undefined one. You know what you're building. You know roughly how long it will take. You know what each month's contribution means in terms of distance covered. That clarity is not just emotionally helpful, it is strategically essential. Now, let's talk about the starting point, because this is where I see most people get it wrong in a way that feels like being careful and is actually just being delayed. The starting point for passive income is not an amount of money. I want you to hear that as clearly as I can say it. The starting point is not a threshold you have to reach before the real work begins. The starting point is a habit, a specific, structural, automatic habit of redirecting a consistent portion of your income into yield-generating assets before you make any other spending decision. Here is why this matters more than the amount. The habit changes who you are in relationship to your money. The moment you establish the automatic redirect, the moment you become, in a real and structural way, a person who positions a portion of every dollar they earn into something that works while they sleep, you have crossed a line that most people never cross. Not because they can't, but because they're waiting for the right amount. Waiting until they have enough to make it feel serious. Waiting until the contribution is large enough to seem meaningful. But here is what waiting does. It lets time pass. And time passing is the one thing in this equation you absolutely cannot recover. The compounding that happens in years 1 through 5 of a habit, even when the amounts are small, is not something you can recreate by doubling your contributions in years 6 through 10. The early years have a compounding value that the later years simply cannot replicate. This is not motivational language, it is the literal mathematics of exponential growth. The earlier dollars compound for longer, and that longer compounding period creates returns that are structurally irreplaceable. Waiting for the right amount is, without knowing it, choosing to give up the most valuable dollars you will ever invest. The first dividend check from a modest initial position might be $4. It might be enough to buy a coffee if you find a reasonably priced coffee. And I know that sounds discouraging. I know that the gap between $4 and $3,000 a month feels so vast that the $4 seems almost cruel in its smallness. But I want to tell you what that $4 actually represents. It represents the first time in your life that money worked for you without you working for it. It represents the generator making its first rotation. It represents the proof of concept, real, in your own account, in your own name, that the second clock is buildable, that the structure works, that the direction is correct. And every month after that, the number gets slightly larger. Not dramatically, not in a way that makes good content, but reliably, consistently, in the direction that matters. The habit is the starting point. The amount follows from the habit. The wealth follows from the amount and from time. But the habit is where it begins. And the habit begins not when your circumstances are right, or your income is high enough, or your debts are resolved, or your life is settled enough to focus properly. The habit begins when you decide it begins, which could be this week, which could, if you're willing to do the exercise I'll give you at the end of this, be tonight. Now, I want to address the deepest challenge in this entire process. Not the financial challenge, not the mathematical one, the psychological one, because I think this is the piece that most passive income content skips entirely. And I think skipping it is why so many people who understand the strategy still don't build the outcome. Building passive income requires something specific of your psychology. It requires you to value your future freedom more than your present comfort, consistently, over a period of years, in the face of constant pressure from advertising, from social comparison, from the culture you live inside of, to do the opposite. Every consumer culture message you encounter is, in some sense, a vote against the habit of building the second clock. Every upgrade opportunity, every lifestyle inflation moment, every purchase that feels like you've earned it and deserve it, these are not evil things. They are human things. But they are all, in the context of building passive income, redirections of capital away from the generator and back into the daily battery. And the people who actually arrive, the ones who get to the Sunday morning where the floor is there and the time is theirs, are not the ones who had extraordinary willpower or unusual discipline or some personality trait that made the sacrifice easy. They're the ones who found a way to make the habit structural rather than motivational, who automated the redirect so the decision wasn't made monthly in a moment of competing desires, who built the system so that the generator was fed before the spending options arrived. Not because they were better people, because they understood that relying on motivation to sustain a multi-year habit is like trying to power the second clock with batteries. You need a different energy source. This is where trading psychology and the psychology of building passive income meet in a place I find genuinely fascinating and important. In both domains in the market and in the slow building of financial freedom, the primary obstacle is not a lack of information, it's the management of your own mind across time. It's the ability to make a decision that serves your future self even when your present self would find something else more immediately satisfying. The skill is the same. The domain is different. And building that skill not through willpower and white-knuckling it, but through structure and automaticity and the patient accumulation of evidence that the small decisions are working is the most valuable thing you can do in either arena. So let me give you 3 things. Practical, concrete, ordered things that you can start with. Not a course, not a system. 3 steps that build on each other and that begin tonight. The first step is to calculate your freedom number tonight. I mean tonight specifically, not this weekend, not when you have more time or more mental energy or more certainty about your situation. Tonight, open a notes app or get a piece of paper and add up your essential monthly expenses. Housing, utilities, food at a reasonable and nourishing level, basic transport, healthcare. Add 10% for the miscellaneous essentials that don't fit neatly into categories but are real. That total, that specific, honest, unglamorous number is your freedom number. Write it somewhere you will see it regularly. Put it in a place that makes it real and present and part of how you think about your financial life. This number is now your primary financial target, not your retirement account balance, not your net worth, not some abstract idea of financial independence that lives in a spreadsheet you look at once a quarter. This specific monthly number. Because everything else, every investment decision, every savings choice, every income growth opportunity can now be evaluated in terms of a simple question. Does this move me toward this number or away from it? That question, asked consistently, is worth more than almost any specific investment strategy I could give you. The second step is to open one yield-bearing account this week if you don't already have one. Not next month, this week. This might be a brokerage account where you can hold dividend-paying index funds or individual dividend-paying stocks. It might be a high-yield savings account as a beginning point. It might be a retirement account you haven't funded in years that you recommit to now. The specific vehicle matters less at this stage than the existence of the structure. You need the account to be real and active and visible, because the account creates a psychological commitment that intention alone cannot create. It makes the habit real before the amounts are meaningful. It gives you a place to redirect toward. It makes you a person who has this structure in their life rather than a person who intends to build it. Start with whatever you genuinely have available right now, even $50, even $20. I mean this sincerely. The amount at this stage is not the point. The structure is the point. The proof of concept is the point. The first rotation of the generator is the point. The third step is to set a redirect percentage, not a dollar amount, but a percentage of every dollar of income you receive going forward. 10% if your current financial situation genuinely allows it. 5% if 10 is not yet honest. Even 3% if that is what is true right now, because 3% redirected consistently for 10 years will do more for your financial freedom than 10% redirected for 3 years and then abandoned because it felt like too much pressure. A percentage matters more than a dollar amount for a specific reason. It moves with your income. When you have a good month, more goes to the generator automatically. When you have a difficult month, less goes, but something still goes. And it removes the monthly negotiation with yourself about whether this particular month is a good month to invest. You have already decided. The percentage is not a decision you make each month in competition with all the other things you could do with that money. It is a structural commitment you make once, clearly, from a place of genuine understanding of what you're building. And it comes out before you see the rest, before the spending options arrive, before the opportunities to redirect it somewhere else present themselves. The redirect happens first. The generator gets fed first, and everything else is managed from what remains. That three-step sequence, the number, the account, the percentage, is the complete starting point, not the complete journey. The complete starting point. The acorn in the ground, and everything I've described in this conversation about compounding in time and the second clock and the patient, unglamorous, reliable building of genuine financial freedom, all of it is the forest that grows from that planted beginning. Let me bring this home. Let me tell you what we've actually done in this conversation and what I hope you carry out of it. We found the number, the specific, personal, navigable number that transforms passive income from a vague aspiration into a real target. A defined problem is solvable in a way that an undefined one never can be. You now know how to find yours. We found that the starting point is a habit, not an amount. That the most valuable dollars you will ever invest are the early ones, not because they're large, but because they compound for the longest time. That waiting for the right amount is, without meaning to be, choosing to give up the most irreplaceable resource in this equation. We found that the deepest challenge is psychological, not financial. That building the second clock requires holding the long view consistently across years of a culture that profits from your short-term thinking, and that the solution to that challenge is structure, not willpower. Automatic redirects, systems that feed the generator before the spending options arrive, making the habit real before the amounts are meaningful. You do not need more money to start. You need more clarity about what you are building and why. You are not too late. You are not too small. You are not missing some secret that everyone else found while you were looking the other way. You just haven't calculated your number and built the structure yet. That is not a character flaw. That is not evidence of something broken in you. That is a Tuesday afternoon with a piece of paper and a decision. Start tonight. If something in this landed, if the two clocks image stayed with you, if calculating your freedom number feels like something you actually want to do tonight, if one of the principles put language to something you've been carrying without quite having the words for it, I genuinely want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. Tell me what shifted, what you're going to do differently, where it connected. That conversation is the real value of this space, and it goes both ways. If this felt honest and useful and worth your time, a like helps it reach the person who needs it most right now. The person who has been told that passive income is either a fantasy or requires something they don't have, they need this conversation too. A like helps them find it. And if you want to keep building this, the clarity, the structure, the psychology of patience and long view thinking that underlies everything I believe about wealth and freedom and what money is actually for, subscribe, because this is the conversation I'm committed to having, one video at a time. This isn't about getting rich, it's about getting free. One quiet, consistent, deeply understood decision at a time. The second clock is buildable. The generator can be built, the acorn can be planted tonight. I hope you plant it.